This is W2, presentation 2 on how to write essays. So this is really about the craft of writing, some hints and tips on how to approach your essay, and some of the common challenges and constraints that everyone feels when they try to begin writing, especially under the pressure of an assessed essay. So this presentation will cover a general introduction, talk about the craft of writing, why you should treat essay writing as a craft, how to make your essay flow, making a convincing case to answer your question, and just generally about the experience of writing. So, first things first, look at the bright side. Writing can be rewarding. Most of our most interesting thoughts drift away from us before we really formulate them properly. So getting them down on paper means that you know what you're thinking and you've caught it. So let's proceed then to the basics. So this presentation is focused on what you're writing. That was the previous one. This one is going to give you some hints and tips on how to go about it. So some of the kind of things people say about writing are that it took longer than they expected, that it was far harder than they thought, that it never goes smoothly, they get stuck, it's very rewarding. Probably best if you have a sound plan or a sound strategy, and different people have different styles and approaches. And other well-known writers will say you have to find your own style. This presentation will suggest a basic writing strategy, and then you'll need to take this and figure out what works for you. So the first thing is, if we consider writing a craft, then how do you learn the craft of writing? Well, it is helpful to think about it as a craft, because if you think about somebody, for example, a cabinet maker or a furniture maker, setting out to make a table, first they're going to have to conceive the design for the table, they're going to have to decide what kind of wood, they're going to prepare it, measure it, mark it, cut it, shape it, make the joints, and finally put it together. And even then it has still got to be smoothed, waxed, polished. So writing essays may not be such an elaborate process as making a table, but it still requires you to work methodically through a whole range or series of closely linked activities. If you just sit down when you've finished reading the course texts and try and write a whole essay in a single sweep, you're really not going to get anywhere. The job is too big. You have to break it down into stages, and then you can take it stage by stage. So fundamentally what I'm saying to you is each of the stages involved in essay writing is important in its own right, and each requires you to develop your own techniques. If you're going to fulfill your potential as a writer, you need to give careful thought to each stage, experimenting with different approaches and looking back over your successes and failures as you refine your strategy. Okay, so you can see those are the key stages and steps set out on that slide. I've also given you a picture of the information that's in that handout on being an effective learner, which fundamentally sets out three core stages of writing and are an embedded part of those steps and stages in terms of the craft of writing. Okay, so let's begin then. Thinking about the So before we finish the slides, what we really need to think about is the fact that treating essay writing as a craft. Up to this stage, I've been talking about the functions, but there's also stages as well. So if you look at taking in the title, big ideas then are underline the keywords in the essay title and think about it over a period of days. Also, in terms of the functions of the stage, the function of this, or why you would do this, is you want to formulate the overall purpose in the essay. Secondly, gathering material. Gathering notes together for the essay from various sources within the course. The function and the reason for this is you're working out what you can use to make of the course material that you've been studying. Generating ideas. is getting ideas onto paper, quickly jotting down thoughts, sample sentences. It's also about capturing your thoughts on paper. Planning, organizing your notes into a simple outline plan. Also, working out what shape to give to the argument of the essay. The first draft stage is writing a first draft, talking your reader through your argument. The function of that is speaking your ideas to your reader, explaining your argument, in other words, translating your plan and notes from your own private language into a shared public language. Reviewing as a stage is reading over your work in the light of the essay title and correcting errors and omissions. From a functional point of view, reviewing is quality control. And the final draft is writing a final draft, paying attention to legibility, accuracy, and general presentation. And the function is to present a polished. The key points of a craft view of essay writing would imply these following points. So I'm going to leave you a few seconds to just read through these 2 slides. Our next section then is talking about how you make your essay flow. So you make your essay flow using link words, signposting, and paying attention to sentences and paragraphs. Link words are very important in writing. They are used to show the relationship between what you've just said and what you're about to say next. For example, they might indicate a change in direction in the argument. So you might use words like however, on the other hand, or but. So have a look at the words that are favorite ones for you. You'll have your own words that you use that you're comfortable with, and consider, are you using a full range of them? When I was in school, I remember the teacher being very strong on the fact that you couldn't start a sentence with and or but. Those 2 words can tempt you into leaving half-formed sentences lying around in the hope that an and or a but will connect them up or something. So I suppose that might be why there was such a hard rule on that. In actual fact, as you get more experienced as a writer, they are very, very useful as an economical way or a device for carrying meaning over from one sentence to another. So it's often worth breaking that formal rule. For example, particularly when you know what you're doing. So for example, but is particularly useful because it's such a quick way of saying, I am now going to balance something against what I've just been saying. Okay, so the key point about this is a writer carries a thread of meaning through a piece of writing by using linking phrases that take you from one sentence to the next. And these show you how to approach each new sentence given what has been said in the last sentence. Signposting then is very important. For example, this at the start of a paragraph connects up what the person has been saying previously with what they're going to say next. Other types of signposting phrases to draw things together include, for example, all the evidence indicates that, or although, another one is on the whole, and another one would be and yet. Okay, in an essay, you may need to indicate progress on a broader front using phrases such as, before discussing X, we must ask the question why, or having considered the arguments against, we should now take into account these. But you don't have to put a signpost on everything that you do. But signposting reminds your reader from time to time where you've reached in the argument and points the way to where you're going. There are some handy handouts in your essay support resources that are just single sheets called Plain English that give you some bigger points and examples of these things. The third way of making your essay flow is, of course, sentences and paragraphing. This is how you unfold an argument, which is through the organization of the words on the page and the way they're grouped together in sentences and the sentences grouped into paragraphs. Some people argue that there's an advantage to having short sentences wherever possible. However, there are advantages to varying the lengths of sentences, which can shift the rhythm of the essay in places, and that helps maintain the reader's interest. So shifting from long sentences to short sentences. Now, when I mean long, I don't mean, as I saw in one student's essay, a single sentence that was about 12 to 15 lines long and was in effect a paragraph in and of itself. You can also vary the number of sentences in your paragraphs to alter the texture of your writing as well. So, for example, you can have a short paragraph, and that's okay. They don't all have to be the same size, but just be sure that each paragraph is dealing with a particular concept or idea, and that your writing is focused in on that within that paragraph. So fundamentally, paragraphs are clusters of sentences in which you normally discuss a single aspect of the topic or one main theme. What I'm really saying then is paragraphs mark the natural breaks in your argument when the focus of your attention shifts. Each one should have its own job of work to do for your essay, and you should avoid making them very long because paragraphing is also a means of signposting the direction your argument is going to take. So readers will get lost if the signs are too far apart or are confused by mixed themes. So what we've been looking at is how you guide your readers through your essay, how in your introduction you pick up your readers from where they are, by holding their attention and starting off a train of thought. Then in the main body of the essay, you divide it up into what you want to say into paragraphs and lead your readers through from section to section. Finally, you draw together the ideas you've been developing and you try to show the reader what you've accomplished. Okay, so the key points then in terms of making your essay flow are simple ones. The fundamental thing you're doing here is you're guiding your reader through the essay. And the 4 points are at the bottom of this slide. Using link words, signposting the stages, grouping sentences, and varying the effect of your writing. The next slide will deal with making a convincing case. So making a convincing case means your essay should have an argument. But how do you persuade your reader to take your argument seriously? The fact that you hold a particular view means nothing to your reader unless you can show why you hold it. So you have 3 basic weapons available to you in this cause. One is to show that you've drawn your ideas from an authority on the subject. The second is to offer evidence to support your case, and the third is to use logic. However, each of these requires a certain element of know-how. In relation to the first one, using ideas drawn from other writers. Since one of the purposes of your essay is to show your grasp of the course materials that you're studying, you're bound to draw heavily on other writers' ideas. In effect, the point of an essay is to provide a brief guided tour around established debates about the topic that the title of your essay is focused on, but also about sharing a selection of relevant ideas from those resources and debates so that you give details of where they come from. So rule number 1 is listing references. I'm not going to go into the process of referencing whether it's Harvard, APA, or whatever. The only point I'm going to make is this, that in the text, when you introduce the work of another person, you simply refer to the author by the last name and add the year of publication. If you quote from an article or refer to a very specific piece of information, for example, a table of figures, you must also include the page number of the quotation. So the whole point of this is that your readers, from your text, can turn to the list of references included at the end and find the information that enables them to locate the particular article that you've mentioned. And then using the page number, they can find the table you refer to or the words you quote from. So in most essays, you're likely to be referring to quite a small number of texts. And I'm going to leave you to work out the rest on referencing. There's adequate materials both in the library and in your essay resources to help you with that. The final key point I'll make on this is that in an essay, you have to work with other people's ideas. However, you're expected to acknowledge where the ideas come from, to say, so-and-so argues, or according to so-and-so's account, and provide the reference. The second strategy or weapon you have in terms of making a convincing case is quoting. So at sometimes you may want to use an author's exact words in order to convey the precise point he or she makes, or to provide evidence that the author did indeed say such a thing. In most essays, you shouldn't need to quote from secondary sources very often, since the essential point is to learn to write in your own words, not use other people's. However, when you do quote, you must provide a page reference in your text. And in such cases, it's also essential that you use quotation marks. Okay, the exactness of the use of other people's words is extremely important. You may think you have done a pretty good job of capturing the essence of authors' ideas, but when you attribute the words to somebody, it's vital that you produce those words completely accurately or give a clear signal when you've made any changes. So there are forms and functions for doing that, but we're not going to get into that at this point. The key point about all of this is that everything between quotation marks, including punctuation, should be exactly as it is in the original text. If you deliberately add or omit something, you should signal the changes with square brackets or with dots. Your final weapon, of course, before we move on to that, I'm just going to say that you need to avoid plagiarizing. If you rely heavily on another writer's words and fail to use the quotation marks and references to acknowledge your borrowings, you will be accused of plagiarizing, and we really don't want to go there. Avoiding arguing logically, you need to avoid drawing ideas from different places so that your work is inconsistent. So what you want to do is you want to convince your reader that they will accept your argument because of the force of reason within your writing. Often, everyday speech that people use can be careless about saying something that follows on from something else. And often they simply mean that most people accept that this does or this does not. However, when you write down an argument, it becomes much easier to spot sloppy thinking. So written thinking is different to spoken thinking, for want of a better way of putting it. And if you're writing as you're talking, there's a chance that your argument might be quite weak. So you need to think about that. In the same way as somebody that you're talking to might say, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. In the same way, your reader might say, hang on a minute, that doesn't follow. So you've got to give more attention to what you claim follows on from what. The key point is that you should say exactly what you mean and then check that your points really do follow logically. And don't be dismayed if you find this difficult to begin with. It does take a lot of practice. The final, the next slide, is the experience of writing itself. There's certain points that probably are self-evident, but I'll very briefly go into them. The first one is that writing isn't an activity that most people feel blasé about. Writing a carefully composed piece is often an intense experience, though not one people talk about freely. Why should writing evoke such strong feelings? Well, why do we tend to avoid discussing those feelings with others who also experience them? It's interesting. When we talk about essays in class or we talk about them, people say it's difficult, but they don't go into the deep detail of why it is. And one of those reasons is that you're revealing yourself. Communicating with other people is fundamental to our lives. So unlike say skills such as juggling or ice dancing or ice skating or whatever, the ability to communicate well tends to be associated with perceptions of how intelligent a person is. If you reveal a lack of talent at juggling or ice skating, that's not too much of a threat. Nobody's going to think much about that. Whereas if you reveal a poor ability to express yourself in writing, it's much more of a personal thing. The question is, why do so many of us think we lack writing ability? So the next one is, by what standards do you judge yourself? So in modern life, we're surrounded by the printed word. We get impression that the world is full of people who find writing easy, and it seems almost shameful to be inept at it, just as we feel dreadfully inadequate at our first driving lesson. But with writing, the situation is worse because what we see in print is public writing. Most of what we read is written by experienced writers, selected for their talent in writing. We never see the writing of all the ordinary folk who muddle along as best as they can. Rather, we see the output of writers who are the equivalent of rally drivers driving around in their rally cars. So when, as beginners, we look at our own written work, what are we comparing it with? Almost inevitably, our writing looks weak in the light of the comparisons that we're in a position to make. So this must be at least one reason why we're very often very shy about our writing and are so ready to believe that we're chronically poor writers. Having compared ourselves not only with seasoned professionals, we live with this private problem. Nobody knows the dreadful secret that we are not really great at writing. And then, of course, there's the private public ambiguity. The thoughts that float now around in our minds are potentially sparkling insights whose possibilities all lie ahead. Then we experience the act of putting them onto paper, which immediately fixes them in a particular formulation and kind of destroys all the other possibilities that wonderful thought might have had. So we immediately have the urge to take the words back and recreate all that potential and leave the great work waiting inside to be written one far off day. Obviously, you do not write an essay with the public at large in mind as your audience. Nevertheless, these contradictory impulses arise: a desire to speak in writing, immediately followed by a desire to retract, a feeling of vulnerability, and yet an urge to go on. In this, as in other respects, writing is a process that gives rise to intensely ambivalent feelings, surges of enthusiasm and satisfaction accompanied by waves of doubt and self-criticism. And that leads me naturally on to the next point, which is taking advantage of criticism. One particularly ambivalent moment is when you get your essay back with comments written on it or in the feedback sheet by your tutor. From talking to people about this, I gather that it's quite common to take a quick look at the grade and then put the essay aside or the comments aside to look at later. Indeed, it seems that some students find it quite difficult ever to get around to a close reading of the tutor's remarks. The comments the tutor has patiently thought about, written out, probably read their work 3, 4, 5 times, are set aside as too intense and penetrating to bear. This, all too rare, offering of feedback is put off to some future day that may never arrive. Now, why is that? It's easy to take the comments made on your writing very personally, as though you're being told you're stupid, that your ideas are no good, and that you're inarticulate. It's very difficult to stand back and see essay writing as a process of skill development in which you benefit from doing quite tightly defined exercises and receive very direct comments on your performance. Each piece you write feels like a personal statement on the issue in question, rather than simply a process of going through your paces in front of a coach. However, from the tutor's point of view, there are probably some very specific things he or she is looking for, and you'll be told quite directly how you measure up. This relationship between you and your tutor breaks the usual conventions of politeness between adults. But by taking off the constraints and allowing a very direct comment, you're actually being given the chance to try out new ideas and new techniques and find out whether they work. Your tutor may sound very critical in the frankness of her or his comments, but that's just the convention adopted in this particular type of relationship. In some disciplines, it's called the crit. It allows the tutor to tell you straight when the point you want to make doesn't come across, where a sequence of ideas is confusing, where the logic is unconvincing, and so on. And this gives you an opportunity to try to remedy the problem so that eventually, when you write it for real, for readers who will see your errors without ever telling you, you can avoid making mistakes. And I know from my own personal experience, it's very, very hard to start writing and take criticism. But like a lot of things, you get used to it. And you reach a point where you actively want people to criticize your writing so that you can find out how to make it better. And it becomes an interesting and engaging activity. I know that's hard to think of at the moment, but really and truly it is. So having direct and detailed comments on your writing then is a rare opportunity, but not an easy one to respond to because of the very personal feelings we have about our writing and because of the unusually direct nature of the relationship you have with a tutor. In my experience, it's as important to tell somebody what is very, very good about their writing or what is and what not to stop doing, to keep on doing certain things, as well as pointing out areas where they can improve their work. So it's important to be able to put this relationship into an appropriate perspective, to be able to ride out the irritation of criticisms that seem to miss your point, to be glad of the detailed crossing out of your words or challenging of what you've said, and to be able to pay close attention to the subtle nuances of the alterations suggested. If it helps, think of yourself as having made a temporary contract with this person, your tutor. That is, for the time being, you agree to accept him or her as an authority on the subject you're studying and your development as a student of it, simply because this person has been there before you, knows more than you do, and so is in a position to help you. But of course, your tutor is not in authority over you because, in all other respects, you are equal adult human beings. And it should always be your aim to treat each other as such. And then we're on to the routine hardships of writing. So one major reason why writing is an intense experience is not at all deep and psychological. Many people just do find writing difficult. For one thing, writing is a task in which the product you're aiming for is ill-defined. So if I decide to paint a door, I know pretty well what I'm aiming at and what a well-painted door should look like. I'm not very good at painting doors, by the way, particularly glass. I'm looking at one here with gloss paint on it, and I know that any painter walking into this room would have about 100 million criticisms of my painting job. So when you are writing an essay, the only thing you can be certain of is the end product will look quite different to what you had in mind at the start, just like my door. This means you have to think very hard at the outset, as you said, about establishing a frame of reference for your remarks. This struggle to forge the way ahead gives rise to a mixture of feelings, from frustration to exhaustion at one end of the scale to satisfaction and elation at the other. Consequently, your mood may swing quite sharply as you write. At the same time, the quality of open-endedness in the task of writing creates a more general feeling of uncertainty, aimlessness, and an absence of solid meanings to hold on to. Then, of course, it may be helpful to switch back and forth between writing and various routine chores to give yourself a break from the pressures of the writing and the uncertainty. The next point, an uncertain relationship, refers really to how uncomfortable writing can be because of the uncertainty surrounding your relationship with your reader. On your side, this relationship is very personal because it involves the way you project yourself. But on the other side of the relationship is shrouded with mystery. Your audience or your tutor is as the one who actually reads your essay will take on the role of the intelligent person in the street in order to read it. This hypothetical audience is one you can never meet to check whether you are adopting the right tone of voice. You can only guess from the remarks your tutor makes whether you're anywhere near the mark. So you can go through great self-doubt as you reread what you've written, thinking of your readers in one way, it may read like a nursery story, but then thinking of them in another way, it may read like an over-condensed gobbledygook. Another challenge is being too close to see. When you're in the thick of wrestling with your line of argument and trying to construct intelligible sentences, your attention is so highly focused that it's almost impossible for you to judge what the words are that you're going to write will mean to someone coming to them fresh and without any emotional involvement. All you can do is press on and hope for the best. It's probably only after a period of several weeks, even months, that you can come back and look again at your work with a feel for what its impact on others might be again. And sometimes in class, I give the example of writing something and moving on and doing other work. And then I was looking for, references and other writing to support my argument. And I found a piece. I thought, really, that's really great. I wish I could write like that. Then I realized I had actually written it about 6 months previously and I'd forgotten completely about it. So, sometimes we don't see our work in the way it is, and it takes time and distance to go back and then see it in retrospect. And sometimes, sometimes we write really, really good stuff. The final thing then is keeping going. Finally, essay writing is a rather long, drawn out process with so many different stages to it. You have to develop a certain stamina to write regularly. It can be tedious at times and disappointing at others. Consequently, it draws on your inner resources of willpower and determination, as well as your courage in facing possible disappointment. It's a great feeling when it comes right in the end, but that moment can be a long time coming. The final slide will cover some basic common feelings that I and other people have had when writing essays. Anything from frustration when you're stuck and you just can't write, writer's block, to not knowing where you're going in the middle of the text because you just can't see where it's going to end. Boredom, when you actually get bored with what you're writing yourself, not a great place to be. Despair, when you're overwhelmed by the time it's taking to get from, something that you thought was only going to take you half an hour or 3/4 of an hour, and 3 or 4 hours later you're still there battling with the same thing. Nausea, when you read what you've written. Gloom, when you see the limitations of your own abilities. And then sometimes annoyance and irritation when you get the editors or the editing feedbacks and comments. But I really would say to you, don't let that put you off. The final slides are a conclusion to this whole presentation, and I hope what I've said and what I've gone through will be of use to you and give you the courage to continue on. Well done, keep going, and you'll be brilliant.